Zero in revenue, up to $100 million in revenue. So somebody sitting next to me would say, well, that's a huge constraint, your faith, being driven by your faith. So I look at it and say, well, we're faithful to our values and had integrity, and God blessed that.
Peter Saddington, your big game hunter. And guys, we have our sights on someone special today.
Only a mother could invest in this idea.
Made this like super artistic.
That is actually absolutely correct. And that's a very, very astute assessment, actually.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of VC Hunting with me, Peter Saddington, your big game hunter. And we have someone special today, Henry KAESTNER from Sovereigns Capital. He is the co-founder and managing principal. He was previously also the chairman of Bandwidth.com. Thanks so much, Henry, for being on the show.
Peter, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's just jump right in. Sovereigns Capital is a growth stage company, and you usually cut checks for $500,000 to up to $10 million. Tell us a little bit about your firm and your fund and how it came to be.
Well, I'll start with how it came to be. So you had alluded to this company called Bandwidth, which I started with my co-founder about 20 years ago. And we wanted to be really intentional as we got started with Bandwidth about our corporate culture and our foundational values. And for both of us, faith is the most important thing of our personal lives. And we wanted to see if we might be able to represent that in a winsome way, an inclusive way in our corporate culture. And so we came up with these foundational values of faith first, then family, then work, and then fitness. And we'd had some money from a prior exit. So for 2 or 3 years, we spent through that, and then we ran out of money. And we came out the Sand Hill Road, as a lot of good entrepreneurs will do, and try to raise money. And we wouldn't talk about our foundational values on a first visit or second visit. We most assuredly didn't have fish on our business cards. But when it came around to a site visit, we'd say, look, we want you to know that we want to hire the best person for the job. This is not going to be a holy huddle at Bandwidth. And yet, we want to bring God glory through what we do as we look to compete and innovate and serve customers. And what does that mean? It means that we're probably going to pray before board meetings. That's the essence of it in terms of how you look at it. But our personal stories are aligned towards wanting to bring God glory through this work, which we feel is our meaningful form of worship. So as we would talk through that, we got a lot of blank stares. And really feel that in the best case scenario, we were misunderstood. Maybe in a worst case scenario, we were prejudiced against, and we went 0 for 40 in venture. Now, fast forward 20 years, and through the grace of God, Bandwidth has been super successful. We took it public a couple of years ago, and that continues to do well. And Republic Wireless is a company we spun out of that, and we've kept that private, and that does really well. And that whole lesson taught us 2 things. Number one, Christian-led businesses, faith-driven businesses, I should say, of course can compete and win by having their faith and the faith of the founders at the core of why they do what they do. Of course, that can translate into business success. But the number 2 is that institutional capital doesn't know what to make of that dynamic. And so we started a fund called Sovereigns Capital, meaning to invest in faith-driven founders, men and women driven by their faith, seeking to honor God in the marketplace, that would want to create a product or service that would solve a problem in the world and would get out there and compete and win in doing it. And so that's the premise behind Sovereigns Capital.
And so Bandwidth.com was really an opportunity for you and your best friend and your co-founder to really kind of exercise this faith-based working culture. Is that fair? And then after, in many ways, it matured into what ended up being Sovereigns Capital. Now, I'm gonna poke a little bit because I did a lot of research here, and I'm gonna jump right in. The first thing that you said is that you have proven, at least to yourself, that faith-based venture capital, faith-based organizations, faith-based cultures can compete, in using your words, and win. I question though, and I wonder, and I question: is it your faith? Is that the reason why? Or is it just through sheer force of brute will? And I'm coming to you as a founder, I'm coming to you as an entrepreneur. So for me, I know, and having my own faith as well, that grit, perseverance, and sometimes just sheer force of brute will can also help you win as well. And so I wonder, how do you dissect the faith aspect from your success? Is it combined with grit and perseverance and hard work, or is it really, do you really see it as, hey, this is God's blessing. This is what God has done for us? I wonder.
Yeah. Wow. Great question. Great question. So there's a whole lot there. Let me see if I can tackle a little bit at a time. Number one, there's a big difference between being willful and faithful in the life of a faith-driven founder. A way to be able to understand that let me say it this way. I talked to you about being 0 for 40 in venture raises.
Right.
That's a period that I could actually characterize as being really willful. So faith is the most important thing to me in my life. Prayer is a part of faith. And we would pray that we would come out of those meetings with Sequoia or Red Point with a $20 million term sheet. And yet we weren't really praying about whether we should be raising money at all to begin with. We were being really willful during that season. I think it's super important to be able to have grit and have perseverance, to work hard. I think those are all very much biblical values and extremely important. And you can't just sit back and just like, well, God's going to provide, and I should expect success that will just kind of rain down on me.
Right.
But a good sign, I think, is how we think about Sabbath.
Okay.
Most of the entrepreneurs that we're competing against believe that we need to work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's what's needed for perseverance and grit. And lunch is for wimps, and Sunday is for people who are going to lose. And one of the things that I'd like to think that we've been very faithful to is the concept of Sabbath. I got to tell you, the hardest thing for me to do on Sundays is not to work. The hardest thing for me to do. There's so much that can be done. There's so much that I didn't get done on Friday or Saturday. There's so much that I want to head off the past for Monday. And yet God commands me to be still and to rely on him. And I'm so grateful for that lesson, because as we are still and as we wait on him, he's answered so many prayers. And it also allows us, when we see success, like taking the company public and the success we've had since we've gone public, lest we take credit for it. And the fact that it was just our grit, our determination, and our will, we deliberately left a seventh, a tithe of our time, if you will, to rest and wait on the Lord. And so you need to keep them all in balance, right? We need to work our butts off. We need to compete. We need to do it. We need to experience God's pleasure as we work, and yet we also need to not be willful, I think.
I think that's a great response, and there's so many examples of this within the Bible itself, right? Paul was a tent maker, right? There was in a lot of the teachings around prayer was not merely just a, hey, just pray. It's to pray with action, pray with intention. Move forward towards things. And I always, whenever I've heard arguments from about the Bible and about what the Bible teaches, I always, and especially around prayer, prayer is with action. It's with boldly going with that faith that is so unseen, that you're going to be going with the Lord. What that means to you, who knows? What that means to me is going to be different for sure. But we can't just use the rails of prayer and just say, hey, we're going to pray and hope we win, right? There has to be intention. There has to be work, grit, perseverance, all these things that you discussed. And I think you've certainly led a life of that. Can we go back a little bit? I did a little bit of research, and I found that when you were over at Delaware as an undergrad, your first entrepreneurial endeavor was a t-shirt making business. Did you always have entrepreneurship on your mind? Is that something that just was naturally ingrained from you from the very beginning?
So that's a great question. Maybe. I'll tell you that, and I say this to a lot of people, that when I went off to the University of Delaware, I discovered my first love. It wasn't Kimberly, who I ended up marrying. It was the fact that I could make a t-shirt for $5 and sell it for $10. Ooh. And I came alive when I came to this realization that I could go ahead and put some capital to risk and then get out there and work hard and go door to door and sell t-shirts. And I felt so alive during that time. I got to tell you, it's probably The last time I really knew that I knew what I was doing was when I was selling T-shirts and in college.
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that. What do you mean when you say the last time I really knew what I was doing? Is it because of the overt simplicity of selling shirts, or is it just due to the additive nature of complexities as you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars?
Yeah, no, so it's all of the above. I mean, selling T-shirt is like, I've got something, I'd love for you to buy it, and it's a yes or no. It's really quick feedback cycles. I mean, there's nothing quicker than that.
Right.
And there's just an incredible simplicity to it. And so, yes, since then I've had careers in energy derivatives, which are remarkably complex and very complicated.
For sure.
There are always people who are smarter than I was in that. And then into telecom, and telecom, there were always people smarter than me in that. Fortunately, we got a chance to hire a lot of them. But there are times like, when you look at the regulatory environment, where you look at just so much complexity. And then you also look at managing people. I can never tell you that I knew exactly what I was doing in managing people. With time, I developed the confidence, and I understood how to avoid making some of the same mistakes over and over again. And yet I never really felt the confidence that I knew exactly what I was doing. When I sold T-shirts, I knew exactly what I was doing. And the simplicity of that, the quick feedback loop, and maybe because it was my first love, was thrilling, and I knew what I was doing.
Well, I really appreciate the candor, Henry, and actually the conceit that you're willing to say on going to be a very public video that you're not exactly sure how it all works out, right? And it's actually interesting that there's not a lack of confidence that I have in you. I actually have more confidence in you because you're willing to say that. And so my question is simply, how would you characterize your leadership style then, considering the context that you're managing, hundreds of people now at your company, you have hundreds of millions of dollars under management, you're multinational, international, in different places. So how would you characterize your leadership style, considering your faith background and the context of, hey, I'm not 100% sure of what I'm doing all the time?
That's a great question. So
I kind of imagine your 400 plus employees listening to this and being like, how's he going to?
So part of me wants to go with the pat answer of that I endeavor to be a servant leader.
Yeah, let's go beyond that. We know that.
Yeah, so part of that is, but I also understand that there's part of a pat answer to that. So, I want to be a leader that, yes, has aspects of service to what I do. I want to be a leader, though, that is about the mission, and that the mission is the most important thing. The mission is more important than the different tactics that I employ in achieving the mission, although those tactics are important. Let me tell you, from a faith-driven founder perspective, there are times when you need to be bold and courageous, and you need to be able to crack some skulls. There are times when you need to wash the feet of those that you seek to serve. The one thing I like to think that characterizes my leadership is being in prayer and constantly looking for God and His guidance on how I might get out there and to achieve what He's laid out in advance for me to do, what He's put in front of me to do. And I hope that in all cases, I can be thought of as being a leader that does love his teammates, that I love them. And sometimes that love is selfless love. Sometimes that love is tough love, but that I love them and that they can look back and they can see that. I want to be a leader that's able to bring great opportunities for my teammates, my employees, to be able to be a part of a mission that gives them life, real red meat, if you will, to really chew on,
right?
And to be a part of a bigger mission where they can really flourish and lean into the creation mandate.
So let's define the mission. I'm going to make an assumption here. Don't have me put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming the mission is to glorify God and to have His name be known, or some permutation of that. Is that fair?
Yes. So you get at something that's super important. So there's in you talk about lessons from the Bible. Some of my favorite passages in the Bible are in Proverbs. and there are 31 Proverbs, so I always know where in the month I need to be. But Proverbs 21:2 and 26:2 says the same thing. I think I'm getting the references right. But it's all of a man's ways seem pure to him, but his motives are weighed by the Lord. So you ask me, well, why do I do what I do? Well, what is it that I'm doing? Is it to bring God glory? And I'd like to think so, yes, but maybe not. Maybe what I really want is, and I'll tell you, the beginning part of my life was really characterized by this too. It's the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of joy. Joy is so much better word than happiness. Happiness has to do with our circumstances. Joy is something that is greater. So what I really want, I want to have joy and purpose and mission in my life. And I find that when I try to know God and enjoy him forever, that I do have great meaning and purpose in my life. When I just go ahead and say kind of in a hollow way, well, I want to make God famous, I want to glorify him, that doesn't really resonate. That feels theologically correct.
Right.
And yet, am I really truthful, honest with myself? Is that what I really want? No, I'm much more selfish than that. And I'm created in the image of God. God made me selfish. And so what I really know, at age 50 now, I'm into pattern recognition as an investor. I experience joy when I seek his wisdom and calling for my life, and I try to honor him through the Sabbath and doing hard work and bearing witness and testimony to my faith. And what does that leave me with? It leaves me with a sense of joy in participating alongside him, even though he doesn't need me. So what am I really after? I'm really after joy. That's what
I love it. And that's actually what you just explained to me would be something that I would love to hear from my leader if I had a leader, if I had a boss, or something like that. But I want to extrapolate a little bit. And again, I'm reading between the lines here, but I want to add a little bit of flesh to these bones. When you talked about the mission, you talked about, hey, sometimes I got to crack skulls. Sometimes I got to have make hard decisions. Sometimes I got to do all sorts of things. And you said that it's not as important around the tactics of the mission. I'm going to say, one of the things that you aspire to be as a leader is to be fully present and available to the entire spectrum of your personality, meaning that you can oscillate, not in a bad way, from, hey, hard words, tough lessons, got to do better, to I'm going to love on you, I'm going to love on you, I'm going to love on you, and be able to have your team, your leadership team, and your company and your culture have full access to Henry KAESTNER. Is that fair? Yes.
With the caveat being, of course, that you need to have the disclaimer that Henry KAESTNER is a sinful guy that makes a whole lot of mistakes. So you can get access to Henry KAESTNER, but I'm going to make mistakes. And when I know that I make mistakes, I'm going to come and ask for forgiveness. And hopefully you'll be there to provide it for me.
I really appreciate that. And what's really great is that everything that you've just said is actually in alignment with stuff that you've said years ago. Let's go way back. In a Silicon Valley prayer breakfast on May 26, 2016, you talked about an individual who'd helped change your life. He was part of generous giving, and he asked you the question, why do you give? Why do you give? And through your explanation of why you gave, you came up with the conclusion that you had been given an incredible gift, and that you are grateful when you give, and this helps you find your happiness and your joy. But you also admitted that you're still discovering and you're still on this journey. And everything that you just talked to me about is that, hey, I'm looking for joy, the mission, but at the same time, everything within that told me that it's like sanctification, right? You're still in progress. You're still in progress. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, I'm very, very, very much still in progress. And I think that it's interesting, the way that I think about how I handle my money is a great indicator about how I'm making progress in my life. So I'm motivated by my faith. I believe that we're created in God's image, and I believe that he is a God that gave. He worked and he gave. And I feel that I'm most alive and I experience his joy when I give. And again, I'm after pattern recognition here. And so I want to experience more joy. And yet, gosh, sometimes I feel really tight-fisted. And sometimes I feel that even though I know I experience God's joy when I give, sometimes it's really hard for me to do. And sometimes I really just, I want to keep more of it. And that's the tension point, probably the tangible tension point in my life is what I do with my money. God did not tell us to take a vow of poverty. He wants us to flourish and thrive. And yet he also wants us to be able to give. And when we give, we become alive. And so how do you balance this wanting to enjoy the great things that he's provided and then also participate in the work that he's done? And so that tension point in trying to seek God and his wisdom and in that process is this place where there's a process that you refer to, and I agree with, called sanctification. And I am so in process on that.
That's awesome. I love it. I want to jump a little bit back because you have talked about this a lot, and that's fair, but maybe my audience has never heard this before. You went straight in to company culture. And I want to go back just a little bit. You said in terms of the company culture at Bandwidth and obviously Sovereign's Capital, it's 4 things: faith, family, work, and fitness. And there's always like a parenthesis in that order. Faith, family, work, and fitness. How did you conceive of this, and why does this order matter to you?
I'm trying to remember why we consider it. So the order of it absolutely matters. I think the right ordering of things is important. I think that, like, for instance, back we were just talking about money. I think that being able to provide for private school education in our case is something that's important. But if it becomes the most important thing in my family's life, then we have things that are out of order. So education needs to come after things like faith. It comes to, why do we do what we do? Why were we created?
Right.
And for us, I think that any leader needs to be able to lean into this question of why we do what we do. And so fitness is not why I do what I do. So fitness can't be more important than faith. My faith is why I do what I do. So then the next one in the order after faith is family. Family has to be more important to me than work, because family is the purest form of the creation mandate in my life, which is be fruitful and multiply, come together with a life partner, be intentional in my committed love for her, and then be able to raise our children in a way where they might find meaning and purpose. That is more important than helping people to save money on their telecom bill at Bandwidth. Now at Bandwidth, it's a lot more. I'm oversimplifying what Bandwidth does. And yet, the mission that we do 9 to 5 is so incredibly important. Is the Chariots of Fire when Eric Liddell was asked, he talked about the fact that when I run, I feel God's pleasure. When I work, I feel God's pleasure. And we're creating the image of a God who works 6 out of 7 days. And so that seems to make sense. And yet I don't think it's as important as the family part. The first wonderful gift that he gave the man was a partner. And Eve. And whether you think that that's literal or whether that's figurative, I think that the ordering of things is important. So God first, then family, then work, and then fitness. Fitness is important for us. Again, it's pattern recognition. When we work out, we feel good. We feel like we're equipped for battle. We're equipped to be able to love on people well. We're equipped to be able to invent new technologies. And you know what? We like it. We experience joy when we work out. I think God designed us that way. And so that's the ordering.
I love it, and it makes a lot of sense. I find I had a question that kind of rose up in my gut as you were talking about this. And the question in my mind was, I wonder. Now, I'm not questioning, the success. Obviously, the success is clearly seen from the outward things that we see on the news and the stuff that you've done. But I wonder, is your success because of this rubric, or is it because that you've chosen a rubric? Now, there's a small nuanced and semantic difference there, but let's put it this way. Great companies have a rubric of culture that they have chosen is the way that they do business. Look at your Ubers, your Twitters, your Facebooks. They have a chosen culture, whether it's been verbalized or not. And that rubric attracts a certain type of individual, a certain type of talent, a certain type of worldview. Let's put it that way. And I think for you, in the way that you've constructed this rubric, faith, family, work, fitness, for you, that not only makes the most sense from a worldview and a faith perspective, but this is the rubric that you have chosen. And so naturally, it'll attract like-minded individuals who agree and fall in line with that. Would you agree that the rubric is the most important? Or is it the fact that you have a rubric that's the most important?
Oh my goodness. What a question. I don't know. I'll tell you what, let me see if I can answer it imperfectly. Number one, our success comes from the fact, it comes from divine providence. That's number one. Okay. So now I want to give, and I think that's important. And I think that is something that your listeners can take away. Let me be more pragmatic though than that in the second level of answering your question. I think that whether it's Simon Sinek or Jim Collins or whatever type of leadership guidance you get, we've come to understand how important it is that we are able to be articulate with why we do what we do. That people follow people who are articulate with why they do what they do. So we have a rubric and a culture that is where we tell people why we do what we do. And why I do what I do is I want to know God and enjoy Him forever. That's why I do what I do. I think that resonates with our employees, where regardless of whatever faith foundation they come from. And I'll tell you, when I talk to business school students, I didn't go to business school. And so I have maybe a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Somebody's getting their MBA. But I say this as follows. I said, listen, business is as simple as being able to get customers in the door and to retain them. If you're really good at acquiring customers, you're going to make a lot of money and be successful. Even better, if you're good at retaining customers, you're going to do really, really well. I think that that's important. But to make business even simpler than that, business is actually about retaining your employees. You see, when you bring on board an employee that's good at acquiring a customer or that's good at retaining a customer, you don't want to lose them.
Right.
The secret to business success comes from employee retention. And people want to know why their leader does what they do. They want to be able to see the sincerity and the integrity in the mission. And so does our mission attract people that then stay with us longer? And does that employee retention mean that we end up having better bottom line returns? Yes, I think so.
I would agree. I think it's important that you as a leader are behaving and modeling that intentionality. Like, you might not agree with everything that we are. You might not agree from a worldview perspective, all the nuances and semantics and idiosyncrasies of our more easily seen corporate faith. But you appreciate and respect that we're willing to put it on the table and say this could be a divisive point of contention, but we're willing to have it out on the table. Is that fair?
Yet it doesn't need to be a divisive point. Now, the key thing is that I don't think that businesses can be Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Muslim. Businesses are businesses.
Tell me more. Leaders,
however, can be Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Christian.
Fair enough.
And so the thing that is we try not to be divisive at all, because we want to talk about why we as the leader do what we do. When we share our faith or our faith journey, that's our journey. It's our story. That's not meant to be divisive. Now, if I suggest that needs to be your journey or your story, well, that is, yes, indeed, divisive. So we need to stay away from that. But as leaders, we need to be able to talk with integrity and authenticity about why we do what we do and how that fits into the overall context of the broader mission, but not necessarily suggest that needs to be the mission of the company. So the mission of the company at Bandwidth is not to save souls or something like that. The mission is to help our customers unlock remarkable value as they innovate around software and telecommunications. That's our mission.
I think that's a great answer and a great differentiator, because I think unfortunately, due to maybe mass media or maybe just movies, is that they've generally characterized Christian leaders as taking over the Christian culture of their companies. And then their companies are these, prayer breakfasts on Tuesdays and salvation Thursdays and, and all these hokey things that aren't really the culture. It's a caricature of the culture. And I really love the fact that you differentiate and say companies can't be Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Christian. Companies are companies. People and faith and us working through that faith is what the culture ends up becoming. I really love that answer. It's really, really, really great.
Indeed. Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this purpose-driven, this values-driven organization that you lead. I had a question because I'm not experienced as you in this world of venture capital in the Christian world, or at least coming from the faith perspective and the faith strength that you come from. My question is this: how does being a Christ follower for yourself, how does being a Christ follower constrain, or how has it constrained opportunities? Or am I seeing this from the wrong vantage point?
Oh,
I'm making assumptions here. The assumption is that there's the world, there's the Christian, there's the opportunity for that Christian, that idea, that message to be a constraint to opportunities, a constraint to success. And I wonder what your ideas are around that, or even if you've felt like your faith has been a constraint in a good or bad way. I don't want to lead the witness.
yeah, no, I don't think that my faith has been a constraint at all. There have been times so if somebody were to somebody who didn't share my faith sat next to me all day, every day, they may look at different times along the way and say, gosh, your faith just kind of constrained that opportunity for success. I'll give you an example. Bandwidth now is very much about voice technology. At the very beginning, we were about data and data technology and helping people to get large internet circuits into their businesses. So we have these foundational values about faith first, then family, then work, and then fitness. And so consistent with those values, we would not do business with spammers or the adult entertainment pornography business. Interestingly, they were the two largest industries consuming internet access, right? So somebody would say, wow, kind of feels like your faith is a bit of a constraint here.
Right.
Or, your ability to prosper. Somebody listening to this might say, I know why he went 0 for 40 now, right? He had this business and he wouldn't deal with the two largest consumers. Right. And yet, an example I think of is maybe a year and a half in, we were remarkably low on cash. It was really the cash low point of the company. So it must have been, I guess then doing the math here, it must have been 2.25, 2.5 years. And a deal came across the pipeline. It was an OC3 circuit, big data circuit.
For sure.
And remember that deal closing, because I remember how my hand hurt when David, who is a former Marine, gave me a high five. I mean, it just really hurt. But I'll never forget, it was a big deal. It was the largest deal we had ever closed. So as you might imagine, because I'm telling this story, this is a deal that was done in the name of a holding company. And we found out in the installation of it that it was for the bad guys. It's for the pornography industry.
Ooh.
So people we think are the bad guys, at least. And so we had an ethical dilemma. Now, the ethical dilemma was not, do we install the circuit? If you have these foundational values of faith, first, family, work, fitness, and you say we're not going to deal with spammers or the adult entertainment business, you can't then install a circuit. I mean, those are your values. You can't compromise your values. Right. That was the ethical dilemma. The ethical dilemma was, do we pay the sales rep a commission on the deal?
Ooh, they did do the work.
They did the work. And they did the diligence. Came in the name of a holding company. They'd done all the things we trained. They'd work on the deal for a month. At the time where we had the lowest cash balance in the company, we paid the biggest commission check for a deal
that didn't happen.
And from that point on, true story, we went from effectively zero in revenue up to $100 million in revenue over the next 6 years. Between 2004 and 2009, we were the fourth fastest fastest growing privately held company in the country from that point, that quarter onward. So somebody sitting next to me would say, well, that's a huge constraint, your faith, being driven by your faith. So I look at it and say, well, we were faithful to our values and had integrity, and God blessed that. Now, there's a dangerous theology out there called the prosperity gospel, right, which means that God's going to bless these things and you're going to make tons of money and everybody's going to be driving Maseratis. That's not what I'm getting at here. I am suggesting, however, that I would say that was an example where what other people would look at as a constraint ended up becoming the biggest part of the foundational part of our culture when it was really tested. and
Yes.
and that we then ended up flourishing because of that.
That's what I was going to say. I actually wrote that down. The question I had is, what's the most challenging decision you've made that was faith-based? And you just gave it to me. And I can see clearly that this was an opportunity for you to really live out your principles, live out your faith, put it to the test. And in many ways, because you were able to make that decision based on values, based on principles, it gave you a lot of focus. It gave you a lot of, I'm assuming here, but I'm assuming it gave you a lot of focus and a lot of kind of momentum of like, this is who we are. And we're not going to compromise our integrity. We're not going to compromise who we are just to make a buck. And for those who are in the faith world, this was certainly an opportunity for you to step out in faith. Is that fair?
Indeed. It is fair. It is fair. Yeah. Thanks for calling that out.
I love that. So let's pivot a little bit here. Notice you moved to a different location.
I moved. I did move. I was running out of power.
It's all good. I want to ask a question. On April 10th, now we're going way back here, Henry. On April 10th, 2009, you had a tweet. So 2010 years ago, bro. So part of VC hunting is keeping venture capitalists accountable to what they say.
Goodness. Yeah.
So in April 10th, 2009, you tweeted, sitting here thinking that it's amazing that Christ-centered microfinance isn't mainstream yet among Christian donors. 10 years later, is this still true? What's changed?
Wow. That's amazing. That's incredible research. I'm just floored by the fact that you went back and looked at those tweets, and I'm trying to figure out what else.
I spent 2.5 hours on you, Henry.
Unbelievable. So you bring up something that actually is near and dear to me. So I'll answer the question first. I think that that increasingly men and women driven by their faith have come to understand that providing economic opportunity to people overseas is a great way to be a great expression of their faith. I think generally that incredible organizations like Hope International remain under the radar even 10 years later. And I think that is a bit of a travesty. Now, Hope International which is my favorite player in this space, although there are others that I love too. The Chalmers Center is great, and 5 others. But I think that they have grown and done really well. But I'll tell you, it's I was back then about that time, a research report came out by NPR talking about the advent of the Green Revolution, talking about looking at it 40 years on, talking about the fact that, you probably remember or know this, of course, but 40, 50 years ago, nobody was talking about global warming.
Nope.
Everybody was talking about the fact that there's going to be mass starvation.
Yeah.
In comes the Green Revolution. It increases crop yields. And NPR did this great retrospective on the 40 years of the Green Revolution. It's really interesting in how, number one, it celebrated much of the success that had happened, but it also had this kind of cautionary, sobering tale about it as well. And what they ultimately came with is this, and this is where it comes with this Christ-centered economic development, is that 40 years on, the average farmer has to drill 80 feet for water now instead of 20 feet. They have to use something like, and I'm coming up with some examples but directionally they're true, that they have to use a pallet of pesticide per hectare instead of just a single bag. And because of the proliferation of debt, they're overextended, and they now have to sell their houses and move back into their tool sheds, which interestingly enough, 40 years ago, were their family's home. And that the number of suicides among Indian farmers is off the charts, much higher than it was 40 years ago.
Ooh.
And as a man driven by my faith and a belief in an eternal God who loves us, and believing in the hope that comes alongside that, I mourn the fact that more people didn't come to know that. And that as great as the Millennial Development Goals are, that being able to bring the good news to people in different cultures, that there is a God who loves them, that they have a hope that can be eternal by coming to know that God, that was really important. And my faith drove me towards wanting to make sure that we are able to provide employment and to provide for clothing and shelter. That's important. You can't go ahead and share the good news of Jesus Christ to somebody who's starving and not take care of their need for food or their need for a job. And yet it needs to kind of come all in together. And so I remember listening to this podcast from this guy. I was listening to Keep It Podcast, and the guy, 10 minutes into it, said, after explaining his microfinance model, said, we at Hope International don't think it's enough just to focus on the alleviation of financial poverty. We want to be involved in the alleviation of spiritual poverty as well. And I remember listening to that and almost wrecking my car. And it was out of that experience that I tweeted that tweet 10 years ago.
Wow. And that is amazing that you remembered the context. And so I'm assuming that this is your faith in action, is that's what your faith in action has driven you to Indonesia, Singapore, Jakarta, right? These types of places. So it allows you to invest in the infrastructure, in the ecosystem, in the culture, in the world, but also provide for physical and spiritual needs. Is that fair? Is that a way of how you've been able to have been attracted to these areas out east?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's fair. Absolutely. It's fair. I feel that there's an incredible opportunity of being able to bear witness to our personal faith by providing great opportunities for employees and communities, companies to flourish. I love that. That's my particular mission. Other people are better at passing out tracts. Other people are better at digging wells. But I am, God has made me a business person and investor. And I like being in relationship with people where with gentleness and respect, I can, yes, bear witness to my faith, but in the process, though, of being able to provide them real opportunity to get funding for their business so that it can grow and thrive.
I love it. I love it. So just a couple more things, and then we'll let you go. I want you to tell us a little bit about faithdriveninvestor.org and Faith Driven Entrepreneur. So there's two different sites that you, I don't know if I couldn't figure out if you'd started them, but certainly you're part of the leadership of those two entities. Tell us a little bit more about Faith Driven Investor and Faith Driven Entrepreneur.
So, yeah, great question. So we have this fund, as you've gathered by now, that invests in faith-driven entrepreneurs. Right. And with time, the word has kind of gotten out, which is a great thing because
trying to help.
Investment fund is about deal flow. And so the more deals that come in, then the better chance you have of finding really good deals. But the challenge is that we only invest in 1 out of 100 deals we see. That's not a problem for a Sequoia or U.S. Venture Partners or Andreessen maybe or some of these other companies, although Andreessen does a great way of loving on people. I should pause there. But for us as sovereigns, that's a great challenge because these are men and women of faith that are coming to us and looking for financial capital to help their businesses grow. And we're saying, no, we're a net, even though we started this to be an encouragement to faith, we're a net discouragement to 99 out of 100. And we're like, wow, are there ways we might be able to serve that larger community when it's a deal that's in an industry we don't know well or a stage we don't know well or geography we can't invest in? And so our aim was to be able to create a website where we'd have a daily blog, a weekly podcast, and a monthly newsletter to serve that larger community. And we've had a lot of fun doing it. It's been great. Now, don't get me wrong. When you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for $1 million to grow your business and somebody says no but gives you a link to a podcast, it doesn't necessarily scratch the itch, but it is a way for us to try to be an encouragement to a broader community and maybe help them be introduced to other people that might invest in their business. Faith Driven Investor was born, which is a separate site. We do a podcast every other week. Okay. Where we in fact talk to Frank Chen at Andreessen Horowitz about the way that they love on people they say no to, which is a great podcast episode. But we set up that ministry out of a realization that as cool as we think that Sovereign's Capital is, and I think we can all agree it's really cool, right? But as cool as we think Sovereign's Capital is, it's not the only way for a faith-driven investor to invest. There are great ways to be able to incorporate the gospel and just to love on people in a way that points to something greater in real estate. And being able to bring in apartment chaplains. There's ways to be able to invest in faith-driven founders and faith-driven CEOs in publicly traded companies. You look at companies like VMware, $85 billion market cap. Pat Gelsinger is very public about his faith in the way that he seeks to love on his employees and to pastor them.
I did see that. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. And so there are a whole host of different managers across different asset classes and different geographies. And our hope was to bring together a larger community that might be able to be intentional about the way that we invest our financial resources in a way that is about more than just financial return, and yet not at the expense of financial return. A lot of people think that when you add another bottom line, that means it comes at the expense of that original bottom line. If you have an investment in something that that has a spiritual return to it, then that must mean that you've given up 20 basis points of financial return. And yet we think that there are companies and investments that might flourish not at the expense of biblical values, but because of them. Faith-driven investor is a community of people coming in and exploring that concept.
I love it. I love the fact that you are constantly seeking out solutions to the tension of your success. And I posit it that way because these opportunities have only come because of your success. As your success has grown, you found that, hey, there's more opportunities to give here, but now we're giving at a loss. And I'm going to put it that way. We're maybe discouraging people, 99 out of 100. How can we solve that problem? And so it's really great that you wrestle with the tension of these new emerging problems that only emerge to you through your success and by the glory of God. It's really fascinating that you're and encouraging that you keep trying to figure out and keep trying to solve. Maybe that's just the t-shirt salesman in you.
Maybe. No, too much is given, much is expected. And so we do take a lot of joy in building out a larger team to be able to try to serve the different opportunities that have been created as we go along the way.
Awesome. Well, let's just finish out with this last question on September 5th, 2012. September 5th, 2012, on Twitter, you tweeted, "I'm being motivated by Deuteronomy 12:18, which states, quote, 'And you are to rejoice before the Lord, your God, in everything you put your hand to.'" So here's the question. What is Henry KAESTNER putting his hand to these days?
Wow, that's great. That's like a voice from the past. It's a great encouragement from old Henry. So thank you for that. What am I rejoicing? I'm rejoicing in my family. Right now I've got 3 teenage boys and they're all becoming young men, and the beautiful mess that is, but it's incredible. It's an amazing, what a great privilege it is to be a parent. I'm rejoicing in my marriage. Kimberly and I have never been closer, and our marriage is infinitely cooler than I ever thought it'd be when I married her. And yet I thought she was really cool when I married her. I'm rejoicing in the work I get to do and in the partners and the team we have at Sovereigns and in Faith-Driven Entrepreneur and Faith-Driven Investor. I'm rejoicing in the success that God has brought to Bandwidth and Republic Wireless that David and Chris are so capably leading. I rejoice in that. I rejoice in my friends in my community here in Northern California, and I see so much hope. Gosh, there's a lot of rejoicing going on. Thanks for asking.
Well, that's what I wanted to end with, an encouragement. I was assuming that you'd give me some great encouragement there, and the audience out there some great encouragement. So thanks so much. This has been a blessing and a life-giving conversation to me, Henry. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Peter, what a great blessing for me and an honor and a privilege. And thank you for the time you put in preparing for this and for sharing all of this with your audience.
Awesome. I really love what I'm doing. I really do. I get to talk to so many different individuals from all walks of life, right? Venture capitalists and founders. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation with Henry KAESTNER that I had. I mean, I hope it was pretty obvious. I love the fact that he came out right from the start, from the faith perspective. He made it abundantly clear, right? From bandwidth.com to Sovereigns Capital, his venture fund that he runs. It's faith, family, work, fitness, in that order. And he spent so much time talking about why that's so important to him, why that informs his decisions, why that's the rubric, the culture that he wants to lead, the culture that he believes is the most effective for him and the people that work for him. We talked about this, right? I asked him whether having a rubric is the most important or the specifics of the rubric. And I think they're both important. I think it's important to have a business where you've created a rubric. This is our culture. This is how our culture is defined. And I've talked about this with other guests on this show, talking especially, let's go back to Jeff Haney's conversation, where your behavior creates the culture, right? How you behave instills the culture. And we could clearly see in today's interview with Henry that he exudes the behavior he wants to see in others. Intentionality, transparency, honesty, even, and I like this, even the fact that he knows that he's not perfect and that he makes poor decisions and that he's trying to be something better, trying to grow, be sanctified is the word that we used here. And I love the fact that when I asked him about his leadership style, he talked about his leadership style as he wants to find joy and purpose, and he wants others to find that too, even if they're still on their own journey. I love this. I love the fact that he's gave us a lot of great insights to where he's putting his time, right? Out in Indonesia, Singapore, Jakarta, having that his mission of life be not only be able to give monetarily, but to also give physically and spiritually as well. It's clear that Henry KAESTNER is on a quest to find his better self, like many Christians who are constantly being sanctified day by day, right? Improved day by day, getting closer with themselves, their spirit, the Lord, their God, every day. It's clear that he's on this journey, and he's willing to share it, but he's not ashamed. He's not ashamed of this journey. One of the things that I really liked is when I asked him the question, why do you give? And this was a post posited to him back in 2006, why do you give? And he loves to give because giving from gratitude gives him joy. It gives him joy. That's what else is there? I believe that having a purpose-driven and a values-driven company is a great company. And this is something that I have tried to model. This is something that I've tried to lead the companies that I've built. Is have this rubric, have the cultural philosophies, right? The principles defined clearly, and try to live them every day, imperfectly, by the way, but try to live them every day. It was a joy and an encouragement to talk to Henry. It's clear I also love about these retrospectives is I don't do any edits. I just let it flow. You get to read all my edited thoughts through the blog post, right? But in these, you just get to hear me flow. And you say, well, Peter, finish your sentence. Well, it's clear. It's clear that he's a man who's been blessed by God. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks so much, guys, for joining me for this conversation. I hope it was as life-giving and encouraging to you as it was to me. Make sure that you follow us, subscribe to us. We're on TikTok, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. Obviously, subscribe to YouTube and check out our newsletter as well. If you want more information on Henry KAESTNER and what he's up to, feel free to go to vchunting.com/Henry KAESTNER. Guys, thanks again for being here on this episode of VC Hunting. I can't wait for more coming up. I'll see you guys next time.